have a very important, I mean, all my guests are important, but I have a very important individual who's going to be coming on with me in just a few minutes or seconds. Um, it is Black History Month. And during Black History Month, we talk about all of these really amazing people who've paved the way, who've gone through the struggle in order for us as Black people to live how we do. And a lot of times in the Black community, we tend to not pay attention to one of the most important things probably in our day-to-day life, which is our mental health. We tend to ignore it. We tend to make fun of it when it relates to, or when it refers to someone else. We tend to dismiss it. We tend to not pay attention or pretend not to pay attention. And when it's happening to us and when we're not mentally healthy, we at times don't know what to do about it. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't know who to talk to. We don't know, because it's so taboo and there's so much stigma associated with it, especially when you're Black. I mean, it just seems like it's a lot worse for us, and I don't know why that is. Maybe my guest today can shed some light and shed some background on why that may be the case. But I strongly believe that without your mental health, you are unable to operate at your maximum capacity. And we may think, oh, it's not important, or she just have a little crazy in her, or we just don't pay attention to it. But it's so very important for us to look after our minds, just like we look after our bodies and we make sure we pretty up ourselves and we're in the fanciest clothes and we always on flick and our nails did and our hair done and our makeup look like we snatched and all of that good stuff. We also need to pay very close attention to our mental health, and we need to I remember talking to a friend of mine once, and he said to me, I'm going to see a therapist. And I go, you're going to see a therapist? He goes, I'm like, is anything wrong? He goes, no, nothing's wrong. I go, so why are you going to see a therapist? He goes, that's exactly the point. Nothing's wrong, and I want to keep it that way. And you know what? That was very enlightening for me, to hear him say that and to admit that, hey, I don't want to get to a stage where I cannot deal with life or whatever life throws at me. I want to be prepared in the event that I have stresses and things to make me depressed, that I'm able to cope and I'm able to handle it accordingly. And I don't know if we'll dwell on that throughout the conversation, because she comes with a wealth of knowledge. She is a young woman. Conveniently, we look like twins today. I hope you guys know who is who. It was not planned. She is of Bajan descent, but she considers herself to be Bajan, living in Toronto. And I think you will be able to learn a lot from her. And as I encourage every single one of you, a lot of people, they wait until after and then they come in my inbox flooding me with questions about things I cannot answer because I'm not an expert. Take the time now and ask the questions. Don't be scared. Don't be shy. There is nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be worried about who's going to think what of you based on whatever question you ask. Ask your questions. We're going to talk a little bit about postpartum depression. So if you're pregnant or if you probably just had a new baby, you want to stay tuned for this show. All right, guys, I wanna just shout out my folks who are coming on. Quite a few folks have already logged in. I want to say hi, Barbie Boo. Barbie's locked in Toronto. Linda is locked in all the way in the UK. I want to say special good afternoon to you guys, and thank you so very much. A few other folks are locked in, but I'm not too sure exactly who they are, where they're locked in from. Drop me a line, let me know where you're locked in, and let me know that you're there, that you can see me, and that you're looking forward to the show today. So I want to know where you're locked in from, if you're locked in Dominica, if you're locked in the US. drop me a note, drop me a line, and let me know you're tuned in. All right, so we're gonna get ready for my guest who is standing by. She's actually in the lobby waiting to come on, and as you see to my side, she is Dr. Fatima Jackson Best, and I'm honored to have her on. We connected through Carrie Scholar. And for those of you who don't know what Carrie Scholar is a foundation, well, it's a mentorship program that has been set up. It's a nonprofit organization spearheaded by my dear sister, Jael Joseph. So we connected through there, and I think you can get a lot of information from her today. All right, so gonna get ready for Dr. Best. I'll find out from her what she prefers to be called. But before we do that, I just want to congratulate Gloria McLaurin's winner of our Cacoa mug. You see the Cacoa mug right there? She won Cacoa, her very first Cacoa mug, and you can win your Cacoa mug too. All you got to do is share this and tag as many people as you can. And if your post generates the most movement, you win yourself a Cacoa mug. It's simple as that. It's very easy to get a mug from Cacoa, right? So we're standing by for Dr. Best, and she's coming on right about now. Hi, Dr. Best.
Hello, Jael.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I love your scarf.
I love yours too. We're twinning it. Look at that.
Not playing.
Mine is actually like a sweater. It's
mine is too.
Yeah. So
mine's like closes.
Yeah, you cold where you are?
Well, I'm in Toronto, so I think you know what the current climate is. I heard today they said frigid February. That's exactly what it is.
You calling that frigid?
Frigid February.
Oh, really? That's what it is. Well, it's freaking cold February. Thank you so very much for being here with us. First of all, I just want to start by asking you, what do you prefer to call? Is it okay to call you Fatima? Is it okay to call you? Okay, so we cool, man. We hanging out on a lovely Saturday afternoon, and I hope that we can bring a lot of information and share a lot of what you know best, what you do best. Conveniently, your last name is Best. So I guess it all makes sense, right?
Yeah, it all worked out.
Yes, it definitely works out. First of all, I like to start every single show by getting to know my guests and getting to know who they look at themselves as, because we all can have our own ideologies on how we see ourselves compared to how people see us. And I like to find out a little bit about you and who is Fatima Jackson Best.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on your show. Fatima Jackson Best is a Black Muslim woman. I was born in Toronto, Canada. I was pretty much raised here for the most part of my life, except for an extended period where I was brought up in the States up until I was about 8 years old. But my entire family moved back to Toronto when I was 8, and I've lived here most of my life ever since, with a couple of interruptions. My dad is from Barbados. He was born in Barbados. His parents were both born in Barbados as well. My mom is African American. She was born in the Midwest. My parents they met in Toronto and got married and had me shortly after. And my brother's in the States. So yeah, that's my background. Both my parents were Muslim at the time of meeting. We were born Muslim. I grew up with a very strong Islamic presence and force in my life through education and through just being in my community. And I also grew up very, very Caribbean, so with a strong awareness of where Barbados was, where the Caribbean was, and also an understanding of other places in the Caribbean because my community was made up of so many people from across the region. So we had Jamaicans, Trinidadians, Guyanese, and all kinds of mixes in between.
Mhm.
So I grew up with a very strong, I would say, Caribbean background, but also a very strong African American background as well from my mom, and then in a Canadian context. So it's kind of like I grew up in a very mixed environment with all types of people, all types of friends from all types of backgrounds, and that has really probably shaped me into the person that I am, which is someone who loves to find out information, essentially as a researcher.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up, because one of the things that you mentioned, of course, is you were raised in a Muslim household. How
Mm-hmm.
so, what was it like growing up in a Muslim household with so many different things happening around you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, growing up Muslim, it's like growing up Christian. You don't really know. Like you go to the mosque the same way that you go to church, once a week or a couple times a month or however it may go for you. So I was kind of immersed in a Muslim environment. I went to an Islamic elementary school, um, and here in Canada, and I also was educated in schools in my own community. And I also went to public school during high school and at certain points in my elementary school. So, growing up Muslim, it was kind of like something that I almost was just normal for me because everybody around me or so many people around me were Muslim. But because my family, my father's family and my mom's family both have such multi-faith backgrounds, Christianity, Rastafarianism, agnostic people, etc. I always was aware of other religions as well and understood that they were all part of, the the family of religions essentially. So yeah, growing up, I grew up with a lot of Muslims from different backgrounds. I went to a private school that had, a really diverse classroom. I had classmates that were from Thailand and from Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Pakistan, India, Somalia, Sudan, everywhere. But I was one of like the very few, I would say probably less than four people that were actually Caribbean background. So that made, me always stand out because I was, black, but black in a very particular way that wasn't, from the East. I was, black from right here, right? So that always gave me a different point of reference and point of view, and also a very different experience. So my Islam and being a Muslim was always tied up in also what it meant to be black, what it meant to be a woman in Islam or a young girl in Islam growing up in the religion. So it was a really enriched experience. Like I had a pretty normal childhood. I grew up with both my parents. They divorced later on in life, or later on in our life. But for the most part, I was like very immersed in family and in community, and just pretty aware of what it meant being in this world in this body.
Wow. What did your parents do when you were a child?
Pardon me.
What did your parents do for a living when you as a child?
Well, my mom was actually a stay-at-home mom for most of my childhood. Yeah, she stayed home with us. She was like the quintessential mom. She used to store our clothes. She used to make all kinds of like amazing dinners and foods, pick us up from school. That was when we were living in Florida. And my dad at the time was an architect. And he had come from Barbados, and he was always interested in like design. So he did architecture. Then when we moved back to Toronto, my mom went back to school, and she ended up working in different sectors, but mainly in the healthcare sector, actually. And my dad, he had a total switch in careers, and he went to work at a place called the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is a mental health institution in Toronto. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so he made like a complete 180. And so both my parents were working in healthcare from the time that I was, in my late teens, in my teens. And that really impacted the work that I think that I ended up doing, which was in health and research. And yeah, like my parents were really, really ambitious people in their own careers. They still are. And they are like people are who strive for excellence in their field. And I think that me and my brothers have always, seen that and admired that. They're two really admirable people, my parents. I'm really lucky to have them.
What your favorite thing that you remember growing up? Just things that you would do as a child that brought you joy.
Oh, the favorite things that I used to do when I was a kid, definitely going to school was like a big one for me. I used to love school. I was always excited to go to school. And actually, that lasted up until I probably not really finished my PhD, but definitely up until like undergrad. I used to enjoy school. High school, I did not enjoy school. But yeah, like growing up, I used to really like school. I used to love to read. I still love reading. I can read a book like in a day if it's a really good book. And I used to love to hang out with my friends. Oh my gosh, I was very shy, but also social.
Mhm.
So I was always, hanging out with friends or talking on the phone with friends or, interacting with people that were in my class and my cousins and people in my community.
What
So I
was,
used to just, sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, so I was saying, yeah, just those were the things that I used to really enjoy, just being around people and like reading and being a bit of a nerd, but also social.
What was life like for you as a black woman growing up? Um, yeah, go ahead.
I know, you know what? As soon as you say what is life like as a black woman, I'm thinking about when I recognized and realized that I was a black woman, which was probably when I was about 5 years old.
Mhm.
Um, I was living in Florida, and there was a girl in our neighborhood, and there was two girls that I used to hang out with, Denise and a girl named Crystal. Crystal was white, and Denise was black. And so we were talking about what, like, who's white and who's black. And Crystal said Denise is black, but Fatima is white. And I was like, okay, all right. And like I didn't question it because I was like, okay, never heard like this black white thing before. So I was like, okay, cool. So I think at the time she had said that I was lighter than something. I don't remember what it was, but something about my skin color being lighter than Denise's, which made me white. So I was like, okay, sounds great. You're 4 years old, 4 or 5. So I went home to my dad, who's like Bayesian and like he doesn't play around. So I come in the house from playing with these girls, and I say to my dad, hey, like I'm white. And my dad was like, what? I said, yeah. Crystal said I'm white. And my dad said, you are not white, you're black. And he sat down with me and we talked about what being black was. And he said, like, I'm black, you're black. Black is like, where our ancestors come from. Your grandparents are black. It's a way of being. In Barbados, a lot of people are black. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm black. And so that really attuned me to like what blackness was. And then I think moving back to Toronto and ended up going to a private school where there was such a diversity of students there. That's where I really saw that I was black. And so growing up to be a black woman, or growing up as a black girl, was always kind of negotiating my identity. Like, where do I fit in? How do I fit in? What kind of, images of blackness are people going to project onto me, and what am I going to project as my image of blackness? So, it was always like kind of a learning experience growing up. But I think that once I hit like 15, I just became way more comfortable in my blackness and way more understanding of my blackness. And blackness, becoming and being a black woman has always been a huge source of pride for me. Once I understood what being black was and like the honor of what a black woman is, it's been like a real journey. But going from a kid where you don't even know what race is to becoming aware and negotiating and understanding identity and how race factors into that. That's I guess where I am now and what I continue to deal with and to explore what a black woman is and what that means for my identity.
What exactly got you to the and you really figuring out contributed or what did you learn about being a black woman that really got you to the point where you are accepting of who you are and love you who you are even more than you did before? What about it? Because a lot of people might wonder, like we're all women, like what makes
Mm-hmm.
you special to be black and what makes you special,
Well, I mean, I grew up with like such powerful black women in my life. Women like my grandmother, on my father's side, she's from Barbados. She came to this country, in the 70s, I think, by herself, to like just because she felt like it and she thought it would give her and her sons a better opportunity. Brought my brothers, her sons, who were brothers, obviously, with her. So I stand on her shoulders. My mom's mother is also like one of the most powerful black women that I know. She's a Rastafarian African American. She's such a bohemian, free spirit. She's an incredibly strong woman when you hear about the things that she's seen in her life. She grew up in the South of the United States. So you can imagine, in like, the 50s. So you can imagine the things that she saw. My mom is an incredibly strong woman. My cousin, who's an older man, his wife is a woman that's always been really influential in my life. And then so many mentors that I've had, just, professionally and in school and in my community, that has really given me a pride of like what Black womanhood is. And it also allows me to accept, like, it has allowed me to accept that I am also a Black woman, and this is what I can be in my own image. All of these amazing women, that resonate with me, I can take, different lessons from them and guidance from them, and internalize it and become the woman that I really want to be. So, I mean, being a woman, of course, is honorable. Being a human being who's a decent person, that is an honorable thing. But I speak from a particular point of reference, and that is as a Black woman. And every day, I'm thankful for being born in the skin and this body that I'm in.
Thank you so much for that. We need to take a faculty break.
Sure. I wish I had a cup.
Look at your cafe. Look at that. Look at that.
My cup is nice.
FATIMA cup, right? Your big cafe.
Yes, my grandmother gave me this cup. Like, I can't forget what my name starts with, but she gave it to me for Christmas. I was so happy. I was like, yeah.
Always nice when you get gifts that are so personal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of thought that went into it. Like, whether or not you want to believe that it might just be a $2 cup, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of
on it.
that goes into that. Okay, so you grew up in a household, and of course, in a Muslim household, and you decided, okay, I'm going to further my studies. I'm going to get into the sciences, into public health. This is really what I want to feature or pursue. Why did you decide to, besides having the influences of your parents who were involved in the health departments or in health, what made you want to get into public health specifically, and why did you choose where to study, and what were some of the things that guided you to that?
Yeah, well, I often think about my path and where I've come from. I actually come from a social sciences background. I did anthropology in my undergrad and Latin American and Caribbean studies at York University. That was my first degree. It was a double major, and I ended up, of course, I wanted to do a master's. Like, I could say from the first 2 weeks of school that I started undergrad, I knew that I was going to do a PhD. Like, there was something inside me. I saw, like, professors who were young. I saw the kind of environment and the kind of thinking that could happen there, and it was so intoxicating for me. I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. And that was honestly, like, very shortly into my very first year. So something that I always wanted to do, get an advanced degree, but I didn't know it was going to be public health. I ended up doing my master's at York University as well in social anthropology, but I skewed towards more of a medical anthropology focus. And so through that, I got to study how culture impacts how people understand health or interact with health, or how healthcare systems have their own culture and other people, their hurdles and barriers that they face trying to access it. So those are the kinds of subjects that I was exploring. And then I ended up doing this specialized diploma in health services and policy research. And I did this practicum at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is where my dad was working for years as a chaplain, which is a person that gives spiritual and religious care to people who are, at the end of their lives or in crisis. So, I ended up looking at a program there that was developing that was specifically for Black Canadians. And so I was looking at questions of identity. How do diverse Black communities in Canada, how would a mental health care service even service all of our diverse backgrounds? Because some of us come from, the Caribbean, some of us come from Black Canadian backgrounds, some of us come from American backgrounds, African backgrounds, South America, Central America, etc. It's such a diverse community we have here. And so I did a thesis about that. And I also got to do this hands-on practicum and do research at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And I worked with a really, really popular psychiatrist. His name is Juan McKenzie. He's actually half Dominican, now that I think about it. Yeah, he's actually a Dominican psychiatrist, like probably one of the most brilliant psychiatrists that you'll ever meet. But he gave me this hands-on training. I got to work on all these cool projects And, that really gave me the impetus to want to do more, work. And so I thought I was going to do a PhD in anthropology. I actually applied to 2 schools, rejected from both. Wow, what a time. Thought that I was never going to recover. But, I took the year to go work a little bit and just refine my focus and, refine what I wanted to do, because I knew I wanted to stay in the area of mental health, but, I needed something that was a little bit more applied. And so this program at UFT came about.
What that you rejected to university? What did that do to your
I mean, it was super tough. I thought I was never going to get out of bed. I was so sad. But I remember a friend at the time told me, Fatima, next year you're going to be laughing. You're going to be in a space where you're going to see so many more possibilities. And sure enough, a year later, I was in a way better situation.
Wow.
Yes, it was difficult at the time, but I just took that and renewed my focus.
Okay.
Excuse me.
No problem. Okay, if you're just joining us, I want to remind you to share the link with someone. Also want to connect with Fatima later on after the show, or even if you want to follow her, she's on Instagram, she's on Facebook, she's also on Twitter. All her social media handles are right in the link, either above or below, depending on where you're checking out this video. You can always go on after and ask questions. She's also a mentor with Care Scholar, so I think she's someone with a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, and she can assist you or try to answer your questions, whatever questions. And I hope that you have questions waiting. You've taken notes of your questions for Fatima, because I think we need to educate ourselves, and sometimes we need to talk to others so that they can share with us their experiences or what they think might be the best thing or the best route for us. I just want to get into the links to show some of the folks who have been coming on. Jael came on. Of course, I have to make sure I bring her up, because she, of course, is the one who kind of connected us. And she says, "You two are styling and profiling." So she's locked in, and she's in Barbados. So big up to you, Jael. We also have a watch party that's going on Facebook, and we have a few people like Prince, who is, I think Prince is in Germany. I don't want to be wrong, but I know he's somewhere in Europe. Who's locked in? We have O'Neill, who's in Dominica, and of course Elon, who is out there in Tampa, Florida, who's locked in on the watch party. So we have a few ways that you can connect, and you can let us know that you're enjoying the show, or just let us know that you're here, or just tell us we're cute. Whatever you wanna do in terms of connecting with us here on the show today. All right, so we're gonna get back to Fatima, and I was just getting into probably the gist of the conversation, because she did do a bit of study, a bit of research as it relates to mental health, especially with realizing how it affects the Caribbean people, and what Caribbean people go through on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'm going to start calling you Dr. Bess, because because I feel sometimes people take people more seriously when you go Dr. Best. So as it relates to your studies, what did you find when you started researching mental health as it relates to the Caribbean versus North America, for example?
Well, I mean, there are two different contexts, right? We have to be completely clear. And one thing that I didn't get to, well, before I started to have a little cough, sorry about that, guys. But, one thing that I started to notice when I was doing my PhD was that there wasn't a lot of information about Black Canadians, and there surely wasn't a lot of information about the Caribbean. So even though, we can look at research that's about Black women, in the United States and kind of get an idea of how mental health and mental illness affects women there, it's always going to be different when you're looking at somebody's specific context. And so, that was a huge factor for me doing research in Barbados and, also for doing research in Canada. It was always about seeing that there wasn't a lot of opportunities and there wasn't a lot of information about these groups, and that, if nobody else was, if we're all noticing that there's gaps, what can we do other than fill them, right? So, when we're talking about mental health in the Caribbean, versus, a place like Canada or the US, we have to think about the histories of those places, right? The US's history is completely different from Canada. Both of those histories are completely different from the Caribbean. And even in the Caribbean, there's so many specific histories and contexts across islands, even communities, that, influence how people look at the world and how they accept health and develop understandings and ideas about health and mental health care. So, the work that I've done, I've been really lucky that I've been able to work on projects that are ones that are close to me in terms of topic. But, I've always been really interested in creating information about women and groups that are not represented enough and that I'm also connected to.
Okay, so you mentioned, of course, we were aware of, there's a lot of different things to factor in when you have to compare the two. But why do you think that there is such a lack of research as it relates to mental health in the Caribbean?
I think it has to do, honestly, with resources. I would never, everywhere I've gone in the Caribbean, Jael, somebody tells me that, this information is, relevant to them because they had experience in whatever, or that, they were interested in this, but, there wasn't the information, or that they've been, collecting data in some sort of way. Like, I always meet people in the Caribbean who are interested or engaged in the work. But the reality is that the amount of the kinds of opportunities that exist for researchers to do real, deep, long-lasting research is not concentrated in the Caribbean. And that is a huge shame, because there's so many talented people who are doing research in the Caribbean and who are capable of doing research in the Caribbean, but there's just not the kinds of resources that, Canadian students have. And so that was something that I noticed right away when I was, doing my PhDs, because I did my PhD at U of T, the University of Toronto, but I right away went to Barbados. I moved there for 5.5 years. And while I was there, I did an exchange at the University of the West Indies. I also worked at the University of the West Indies. And, I noticed right away that people who were, in the same year as me, or, at the same progress line as me, just didn't have the same kinds of opportunities and access to certain opportunities that I had through the university there. So I think it's really an issue of resources. I think if the Caribbean had a flood of resources for mental health, you would see so much amazing work done because people want to do it.
Awesome. That's to know. A lot of times, people just not interested in it, or people just don't want to talk about it, because it is a conversation that can be considered sort of taboo, somewhat stigmatized. And a lot of times, somebody's going through a tough time, and all of a sudden you hear people say, "Oh, she in the crazy house," she went to the madhouse. I have a friend who she used to call it. What she used to call it? Now there was a specific word she called it. Like she go uptown, it's like went somewhere, special. Even sometimes you found that mental institutions in the Caribbean are have it's like a prison. They have almost like cages. I'm not saying that that's the case in Dominica. I'm just saying based on following different people's statuses, based on talking to a few people, and even I think I heard you mention it slightly on during your TED talk, when you were featured in your TED talk um, a little while back, you know that a lot of mental institutions in the Caribbean are like prisons, or at least the outside of it looks like you're coming to a prison and they have to shut you in and they have to lock you in and probably put straps on you and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to know that you feel that a lot of it has to do with the research and not having enough resources in order to do the research. Um,
Yes.
and if that was included, if that was introduced, then more of it would be done. Why do you think that the entire mental health fraternity, so to speak, in the Caribbean is so um, has allowed us as Caribbean people to feel somewhat strange about mental health?
Wow, Jael, these are like really serious questions. I mean, I think that you have to look at where a lot of psychiatry comes from, right? The history of psychiatry is not one that's unproblematic. There's a lot of racism and racist ideas and really messed up ideas about women and about people from different marginalized communities that psychiatry basically like promoted. So that psychiatry, it's not like it was like only in the US and Canada and the UK and it stayed there. We know that all of those countries had influence in the Caribbean, especially the UK, right? So there was a period in Canada where mental health institutions were also like prisons. They were essentially asylums, right? Like there's so much work that's been done about that. So, but with the advent of something called deinstitutionalization, which is kind of like a term that brought people out of like, these confined mental health places and introduced something called community health, mental health. You saw that with that kind of attitude shifting, less of there was less of a confinement issue around mental health institutions, but mental health institutions in Canada are still quite stigmatized, and mental health is also still stigmatized. We have campaigns now that, seek to do that destigmatizing work, but there's still campaigns happening, which means that there's still stigma. So when you think about those countries and the Caribbean, the Caribbean is also going to be, influenced by racism and psychiatry, marginalization, negative ideas about communities and groups. So it's simply just replicating the disciplines that it's been based on. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's a Caribbean problem. I think it's a problem across the board when it comes to the way most of us look at mental health and stigmatize it. In the Caribbean, there's specific problems and specific kinds of stigma and experiences, but it's not it's not it's not just us, it's everybody who's dealing with this and trying to destigmatize it because we're realizing more and more that it's affecting most of us.
Mm. Now, I want to go into something that, as a woman who's had kids, and I've known of people who've gone through the similar stages. I remember a few years ago, there was a young woman from Dominica um, who murdered her two. I don't know if you recall that.
I remember, yeah, I remember that story.
She was Canadian and Dominican,
I remember.
and she killed her two kids. And I remember the authorities in Canada they intervened in the entire thing, and she was sent back she was sent from Dominica back to Canada to receive treatment, etc. And it was said or alleged that she had suffered from postpartum depression, right?
Right.
And it's something that I've spoken. I have a very close friend who mentioned to me when I was expecting, and that's something I didn't know. She has two kids. She's of Caucasian descent, and she said to me when she had her kids, especially with the second one, she thought that she was going to go crazy. She said
Mm-hmm.
she wanted to rip her skin off of her body. She
Mm-hmm.
would constantly like scratch herself. She wanted to. They had to take the baby away from her. The second one,
Wow.
took the baby away from her because she did not want to see the child, and she to this day she cannot understand why she would have felt that way towards a child that she adores so much. That she lives for. She could not understand what caused or what triggered or what made her feel how she felt. And it's a question that comes up a lot among women, especially women of color, because a lot of us, and I say us because we don't understand what it is, and we don't even understand when to recognize it. And I remember, a friend of mine saying to me, I'm from Dominica, and of course, I have quite a bit of friends who've had kids in Dominica. I never actually had a child in Dominica, so I don't really know what, and I don't want to say that that's the case, but she was talking out of her experience. So that may not be the case across the board, but based on her experience, she was saying that she never remembered one time being asked, "Are you okay? Do you feel like killing yourself? Do you feel like killing the baby? Do you feel down? If you ever feel, and I remember having my especially the most recent one, my baby here, that was something that I got asked every week. You know, how do you feel? On a scale of 1 to 10, like there was this interview that went on about in terms of trying to identify whether or not I had or I was suffering from baby blues or any sort of postpartum depression. What is the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression?
Well, I think it's really helpful to think about maternal mental health on a spectrum. So if you think of, the baby blues being a mild form of depression, it's usually shorter in length, usually goes away at about, 2 months, few weeks at last. It shouldn't really go on too long. It's a very common form of depression. They say about 80% of women in these stats that exist, well, that's a different conversation, but existing stats say about 85 up to 85% of women will experience the baby blues. Postpartum depression, you can think of it like right here in the middle. It's a more severe form of depression. It's actually categorized on the DSM. It's a diagnosable mental health condition. The symptoms will last a lot longer. They can get more severe. But there's some symptomatology that people would experience, like crying, feeling disconnected from the baby, having suicidal thoughts, possibly, feeling anxious, feeling disconnected, etc. And that can last for even they say up to 2 years, even longer if it goes untreatable. And then at the other furthest end of the spectrum would be postpartum psychosis. And postpartum psychosis is like any other form of psychosis. It's basically a mental health break that a person experiences, and that can also have certain symptoms like suicidal ideation or even attempts. And feeling, very disconnected from your baby, having, manic episodes, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's different forms of maternal depression, right? And just because you experience the baby blues doesn't mean that you're going to experience postpartum psychosis. Just because you experience postpartum depression doesn't mean that you're going to go to the end of the spectrum as well. And people slide between them as well.
What causes the baby blues? Why do you feel the way right after having a kid? Why is it 80% based on research that you feel that what causes it?
Well, I think that the causes are pretty straightforward. It's like after you have a child, your hormones change, and your hormones have already been changing as you've been pregnant as well. So, with the birth of a child, your hormones and also your entire structure, your whole experience, your whole reality changes. And so sometimes a lot of us have difficulties dealing with change, essentially, right? And some of us deal with change in different ways, and some of us deal with it by moving head on to it. Some of us experience it, by becoming depressed. There's also information and evidence that says that if you experience depression while you're pregnant, that you could also later experience postpartum depression or the baby blues. There's also information and evidence that suggests that if you experience any form of depression, you may experience postpartum depression or the baby blues later on. So it can also be genetic, it's hormonal background, but it's not completely out of it's not something brand new. People have been actually studying postpartum depression and mild depression, like the baby blues, in the Caribbean since the 60s when I started looking at the literature. So, there's been information. It was written all by men, and some of it's pretty messed up. But, people were interested in it. So it's been around for a really long time. And even when I was talking to women in my study in Barbados, in different places, like there's women, most of them were from Barbados, but some of them were also from Guyana, St. Vincent, Antigua. And I remember a Guyanese woman saying that her mom had something called maternal melancholy. And I was like, whoa, never heard of that. But essentially what she was explaining was the baby blues are postpartum depression. So these are things that have been happening for a really long time. But we just have more information and research and questions about them, through science and innovation.
Okay, now we may have viewing even after the fact. You may log in and be interested in knowing a little bit more about this. What are some of the things that we could do just from a home basis? You know,
Mhm.
forget about the and not to consider as yet reaching out to a medical professional. What are some of the things at home? It might not only just be a mom. It might be the dad, your husband, your boyfriend, the people around your household. What are some of the things that can be done from a home standpoint to help with coping with the baby blues, for example?
Well, I mean, support is super important. I am not a mental health care practitioner, I'm a researcher. So I speak from a research perspective. But I remember women in my study who had the baby blues and never experienced postpartum depression talking about how important having support from their moms or their friends or their sisters was. So, support meaning, opportunities to have time alone, so giving them childcare. Also getting monetary support was super important for women as well. It was helpful, for women who were unable to work immediately after having their child. And just from a people perspective, a lot of my friends have children, and I'm really aware of what happens after having a child. So checking in on people, going by, helping, being hands on, cleaning your friend's house, doing the dishes for them, all that kind of stuff is really, really important. And those are all forms of support. And I would also say that, I know that you said before you go to a healthcare service provider, but, that's actually really important to do from the beginning. So if you're feeling any kind of way about your wellness or your mental health after having a baby or while you're pregnant, I would suggest talking to your doctor or talking to a professional because it's always easier to catch things early or to prevent them, right? So that's why people were asking you, how are you feeling after you're having a baby because they want to monitor you. So it's more difficult to monitor you if you have fragmented healthcare or if you are not able to be forthcoming or open about your mental health status. So making sure that you have those kinds of outlets and those opportunities to talk to mental health care providers and maternal health providers about your mental health is really important. So I would say, start talking about it early, even if you feel like a small inkling, like nothing is too small.
What have you sort of discovered about the Caribbean as it relates to mental health? Because you
Um,
quite a bit of research.
I mean, I yeah, I've been able to do some research across, like in the Caribbean as it relates to mental health for sure. I would say that what I've seen the most is that people in the Caribbean are really open and willing to talk about mental health care. I have done, work with LGBT communities. I've done work with women. I've done work with, Muslim women in the Caribbean. And everybody is like really open and willing to be really vulnerable about challenges that they're experiencing, whether that's personal or collective. And so that gives me a lot of hope. As somebody who studies and researches mental health, I'm always like joking that I have to stay upbeat. I have to stay positive, and seeing people be so open and so forthcoming and so willing and interested in their health, their mental health, and in their wellness, it actually is really, really exciting. So I would say that in the Caribbean, like there's an openness and a willingness that I've experienced of people wanting to talk about it. And I'm sure that that has to also do with the work that I do. I think people know that, this is what my interests are, and it's like I try to create a safe space for people. But, I also hear people talking about like the lack of access to resources that they need. And those are mainly, and I hear that across the Caribbean. that's like a challenge that everybody's talking about, lack of affordable mental health care. And that's an issue right here in Canada, right? Like, it's, yeah, I'm
Yes,
sure you know. Yeah, it's extremely difficult to get high quality, low cost mental health care that
and
is
it's
like
going through so many
consistent.
channels in Canada.
It's so fragmented. I mean, I'm dealing with that now in my day job. So it's in the Caribbean, it's no different. Like, there's not a lot of access to those, and there's not a lot of those resources for people, and people need good, high quality, low cost, or free mental health care. And it should be like in Barbados, healthcare is free. There's private and there's public. Like, mental health care should be like a strong part of that. So that should be everywhere. We all deserve good mental health care.
Okay, we have a comment here from Jael. She said, I'm interested in mental health and studying, example, mental health issues such as depression during a PhD, and how the challenges faced by Caribbean people in one, acknowledging slash diagnosing these issues, and two, seeking help. Side note, I always find white colleagues slash friends are more open towards therapy, etc., and the challenges.
Mm. That's a really important statement and intervention that Jarrell is making. I would say that you can lead by example. When you become more open and more willing to talk about mental health, putting information and putting, outputs out there around mental health, whether that's blogging, whether that's content, videos, interviews, whatever, doing things like what you're doing right now, JL, we can normalize talk in our communities about mental health. It's not about any group or any race being more willing to do something. It's just, a practice. So it's something that we must practice, but do it in our own specific cultural kind of context and in our own cultural ways, right? We do talk about mental health. Like, I was listening to 2019 Soca the other day, and like half of it's talking about, madness and mental health. Like, yeah, I was listening to a song and I was like, oh, okay, this is about mental health. I get it. And I love soca, so you're not even thinking about it, but you're at the gym and you're like, wait a minute. So we talk about these things all the time. Like, we talk about the person who's on the street who's a madman or a madwoman, however we frame it. It's just that the ways that we talk about it can be problematic, and we need to shift those. And we need to talk about it in more positive ways. But when we talk about things like self-care and treating yourself and things like that, that is also mental wellness. So I think that we have to think about what we're listening to and what we're looking out for as coded words for mental health and mental health care. Like, you're not going to walk into a polyclinic or a community health center and a woman's going to say, not every woman's going to say, I'm experiencing postpartum depression. She's going to describe her symptoms, right? So it's what you want to hear. So I think that we need to start turning our ears on in different ways so that we can listen in our own cultural ways.
That's very important. And thank you for that, Joel. What do you think causes Caribbean people, or specific? Because I know you said from the time you started talking to Caribbean people, they're very open. But in general, I still find Caribbean people, they don't want to talk about it. It's like you tell them, oh, you need to get treatment, and they think initially from the time a psychiatrist tells you that they're gonna put you on medication, you've been deemed a crazy person.
Right.
Oh, she off her meds. You automatically called a crazy person. So I as much as when you were conducting your research, of course, people will be willing. I feel people will be more willing to speak to you because they see the need for help. But in terms of going out there and getting the help,
different thing.
that's a totally different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
Now, why do you think people are so resistant or speak less about their mental health? And how do you think we can change that?
Well, I mean, this reminds me of something that happened in my research. So in my project in Barbados on postpartum depression and the baby blues, I ended up building into the intervention a 1-hour free counseling session for any woman that did an interview with me. And so there are several women who said, I'm going to call the therapist, and I'm excited, and thank you so much. And, I would communicate to the therapist, you might get some calls from some, people. I can't tell you their names, but, they're, just be on the lookout. And not one woman called and used the therapist. And like I was really, really pragmatic in how I chose the therapist. If she was somebody who was Bayesian but not educated in Barbados, so I thought that I could give women like kind of a comfort level of like because people talked about wanting confidentiality, and feeling like things weren't that anonymous, and feeling like that was unsafe. So I did all these things, and no women ended up using her or calling her. And I was always like, I was really interested by that finding or by that what happened there because it was free, but nobody accessed it. And I started thinking about why people might do that. And I said, it could be that number one, it's still stigmatized, right? Like there's still stigma around going to this person to talk about my issues that I'm having, with connecting with my child. Or maybe people thought that, the interview that they did with me was like kind of like cathartic, like they got things off their chest and that's what they kind of just needed to do and that was enough. And they saw me as being safe because, I don't sound like a Bayesian and I'm not obviously born there. So, I think about why those things happened regularly, and it relates to your question because I think that there is still stigma about mental health, right? There is still stigma about taking medication. There's still stigma about going into mental health institutions, and women in my studies talked about that. Even being seen going into the Black Rock Psychiatric Hospital in Barbados was like a really stigmatizing thing. Or talking about going there was quite stigmatizing. So, I think that there's still that people have to confront. But then at the same time, there was, women who talked about wanting to have, talk therapy or not being able to have, a social worker or somebody that they could just talk about their problems with. Instead, they were being sent to psychiatrists who could give them medication, but they wanted just to have that opportunity to talk. And so one of the biggest findings in my work was that women were talking about, like, why isn't there a support group for postpartum depression and the baby blues from maternal depression? And so, that was something that they specifically kind of like outlined what it would look like. It would be confidential. It would be other women who had experienced postpartum depression or the baby blues. And, it would just be like a comforting and safe space. Mm-hmm. So there's all that in Barbados. So I think that maybe if we had more options of what mental health care looked like, maybe we would see more people accessing it. I mean, like right now you can, in Canada, like if you have money, you can get mental health care via Skype. You can do it on an app. You can go in person. There's all different types of ways. If we had those kinds of similar like frameworks and opportunities in the Caribbean, maybe more people, and if they were low cost and free or affordable, maybe more people would be willing to do the proactive work around their mental health care. So I always think that, it's not a matter of people. I think about what are the issues and the factors surrounding people that prevent them from doing things that they know they should do or feel that they should definitely do.
Well, Jael adds something to that, and she said she finds that there's a stigma around mental health in the Black community. And in her case, she was almost embarrassed to admit that she needed help because it felt like a weakness. I assume that was a cultural thing, while others would speak openly about going to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some work that I did a couple of years ago about like the image of like what Black women are supposed to be, and there's so much rich information about that. So I think that for Black women, there's a particular emphasis on strength and resilience and being able to conquer anything because your ancestors did it, so you'll get over a little postpartum depression or anxiety or stress, you know what I mean? But those kinds of attitudes have been born out of a specific kind of context, right? A lot of our ancestors were in situations. Pardon me?
They were in a lot of situations where they had to cope.
They had no choice, right? You don't have the opportunity to get help at all. And so that is what coping mechanisms they had to adopt for their situation. And that worked for them because they were fighting for their lives, right? But we can't use the same frameworks for us in this current situation because we have not only stuff that we're dealing with now, but all of that stuff that happened to our ancestors, that intergenerational trauma that we carry with us, we have to deal with that too. So we need to find way more creative and complex ways to deal with it. And that might look like, talking to a therapist. That might look like medication. That might look like meditation. It might look like yoga. It might look like spirituality. It might look like a mixture of all those. It might look like nothing at all, something that I didn't say. But I mean, we have to in our community, like as I said, we have to normalize this kind of talk. So when I get opportunities like this to talk about mental health in this kind of setting, I'm always happy to take it because it's normalizing the talk. Like everybody who's listening and everybody who will listen will hopefully get an opportunity to think about how they think about mental health and to challenge that and to think about how we can make it more normal.
We have some conversation going on here. Thomas Joseph is asking, do you think people are less prone to get help because of privacy and accountability issues or concerns?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, based on my research alone, that was one of the hugest things that women talked about as being, a big barrier for them getting help. That they were not sure that the nurses or the healthcare providers at the hospital would keep their information private.
That's a
That
big
they Yeah, I mean, a lot of women talked about that, and that's not only just women in the Caribbean. Like one of my mentors, her name was Dawn Edge. She's a Jamaican researcher in Manchester, UK, and she deals with mental health amongst Caribbean women too. And she did some postpartum depression work with Caribbean descent women in the UK, and they were also worried about confidentiality. So this is something that it could be in a small village in Dominica, or in a larger city in Barbados, or with Caribbean people living in the diaspora in Toronto or London, right? Like these are issues that follow us, and in the Caribbean it's even more pronounced because the space is so small. So even like I would like interview a woman like 2 weeks ago and then go to the market and there she is, and I'm like there with like my friends or my stepmom, and it's like like they would always greet me, like they were always so like gracious. Still to this day I run into them, they text me, people, women from my study, and how do I introduce you to like my friends, like so it's
I
like,
know.
oh, we're married, like how do you guys know each other? Oh, we work together. But you just figure it out like in the moment. But for me, privacy and confidentiality are extremely important. I take that really, really seriously. And I think that was also one of the strengths of my research, that I assured them that like your information is going to stay with me and it's going to be completely confidential and private, and you don't have to worry about that from me. And I think that was also probably one of the hesitancies that some women had towards getting other healthcare from their doctors or their other nurses. Maybe they thought that they weren't going to be as confidential with their information as possible, and that's a valid concern.
Do you think more should be done in the Caribbean? And I like to focus a lot of my attention in the Caribbean because I do have majority of my viewers are Caribbean people, and
Mhm.
and it's all about helping my people, right? Do you think there's more that can be done, or what do you think can be done in terms of professionals uh, being keeping people's business, to themselves? Because
Yeah.
that's something that okay, I grew up, my mom was a nurse, right?
Mhm.
I grew up around her, and boy, I wish my mom was like Bethy sometimes, so we could know what's going on in the community. But she
Mhm.
would never tell us. Like we were, like somebody, like she was on call 24 hours, so at any time someone could come to the house, and the only time we knew what was wrong with someone was if they were pregnant and they were having a baby.
Mhm.
That was the only, or if the person died, the person died, and somebody might say they died from a heart attack or
Mhm.
something. But it never came out of my mom.
Yeah.
Like it was like pulling teeth trying to get her to say something. But that is not always the case in a lot of for a lot of persons who come in contact with different medical professionals, that there's no privacy act or something of that sort in place. To shouldn't your information be treated like you were going to a lawyer? You know,
I mean, yeah, everybody deserves to have their information kept private and confidential. In research, there's like something called ethics. You have to be anonymous. You have to make sure that people's information is kept, not only their names, but like identifying factors. So, like, if Jael had, a mole here and a mole here, I'd have to make sure that I don't describe her in a way
I do
that
have
identifies her.
I have a mole here and a mole there.
I'm just saying, like I have a mole, but you know what I mean. But like there's a code of ethics that you have to act by, and doctors and them they have a similar, like they know what they're supposed to do. So I mean, I read this article. It was a research project. I believe it was conducted in Barbados, actually, about issues of confidentiality. And actually, nurses and doctors themselves were saying that they felt that there wasn't enough confidentiality amongst themselves. So I was like, this is pretty telling. Huh? Like, they're even nervous about like amongst themselves. So people just need to act way more professional. And also, like, researchers need to act with a high level of ethical integrity. Like, if you're coming, especially if you're someone like me, I consider myself a Bayesian. I'm a citizen by descent. I have like passport, the whole thing. But I'm coming into a space that I'm not from, so I have to be like, first of all, humble. I have to have integrity. I have to have a certain level of professionalism. So people, like researchers, need to do the same thing. Sometimes people go to the Caribbean, and I find this particularly sometimes with people who are not from the space. People act lackadaisical, and like this is people's lives. You have to treat it with some seriousness. So I always approach my work with a level of, I try my best to approach it with a level of, professionalism and confidentiality. And I just think that people need to do the same thing, whether you're a nurse or a doctor, a midwife, or a social worker. People need to make sure that they're, ensuring that they're doing the right thing.
Now, that question says, is it a burden in a lot of people's stories?
Oh my gosh. I'll tell you the truth. Yes, sometimes it is. Like, I find that people definitely confide in me a lot. People that I know and people that I don't know. And it can get very difficult. But one thing that I've been doing a lot more of is creating boundaries and taking really seriously what that means. So for me, boundaries is not keeping my phone on all night long, making it go on do not disturb after between 11 and 6. Boundaries is also, being able to tell people I'm not in, a space or capacity right now to like listen to your problems, and can we talk about this later? Boundaries is, taking time for myself. So, people unload on me a lot, or they share a lot of their information and their like personal stories. And I look at that also as being, there's a privilege in that too, because I think that I know that I was called to the work that I'm doing right now. And I know that I'm in a position that I am in right now for a particular reason. And I know that I'm following a path that is specific to me. And so I know that when you're walking a path that you're supposed to, there's going to be difficulties. And I think that, dealing with people's, the weight of people's stories is one of those difficulties, but I'm just learning how to deal with it more differently, and to create really clear boundaries for myself and to put myself first as well.
Wow. Some of the things that is being done and to help people with the coping aspect of the whole mental health thing. Some of the things, because I know your research is based in Canada, but you collaborate with the Caribbean. What is being done from your end as it relates to that?
Well, funny you mentioned that, Jael. I actually just started this new job in September. I'm really excited about it. It's called Pathways to Care. And Pathways to Care is a mental health intervention for Black children, youth, and their families that's going to be in Ontario. So starting in Toronto, but also branching out to several other cities across the province. And so I'm basically the designer of that, and I'm going to be working with health promoters, researchers to design a strategy and a framework that different partners can use to implement it to help Black children, youth, and their families navigate the mental health care system, which is incredibly important for me because I have always been researching what the problems are, and now there's like the opportunity for some sort of solution, and it's at the structural level. And that's really important because we can keep putting band-aids on the situation, but it doesn't make, anything better sometimes, right? So that's the work that I'm doing now. And I have, through that work, I've been able to do small collaborations so far with some people in the Caribbean, and, creating opportunities for people to do different work with the project, whether that's developing a web resource that we're going to have a website up, and other consultancy opportunities. So even though it's the work that I'm doing is specific to the province of Ontario, it's a Canadian project. We know that in this context in Ontario, there's a lot of Caribbean people, and there's a lot of people who have specific backgrounds and experiences. So I'm always interested in building the links between the Caribbean and this, in Canada, so that we can create a continuity. So my idea is that hopefully my project will have some structural elements to the strategy that can be implemented in the Caribbean and Africa and South America and Central America. Like, that's my dream, obviously. So that's what I've been doing now. And I mean, I do different workshops in the Caribbean. I get invited to do different work with different groups and communities. And, I love working in the Caribbean. There's nothing better than being able to work in a region where I feel such a deep connection to, and also where I owe so much to in terms of my personal, professional growth and my spiritual and my emotional growth. Like, the Barbados and all of the region has been so instrumental in that work and making me who I am. So this work that I do is, I'm always thinking about, the place where my father, my grandmother, my great-grandparents come from.
That sounds excellent. I want to talk briefly about, okay, as you know, about a year and a half ago, some ago, Dominica had this major hurricane that destroyed the island. Kids were, and I'm zooming in on the kids because I recognize that a lot of times we as adults, we forget about kids and their mental health. And we start reacting when later on in life, we don't realize when it started, and it started somewhere way before than when we actually recognize it, when they start really having outbursts and stuff. But Dominica was faced with this hurricane, and I must commend, the students who were able to go back to school months later, weeks later, some of them, and they performed so well at their common entrance exams, at their CXC. They came out with remarkable results, like results that were like phenomenal, because first of all, they could not understand why, how comes, they didn't have enough time to put, some of them, their tuition, not their tuition, but their exam fees were paid late. People had to help them pay that because people didn't have money. There was a lot of things going on at the time, and yet these kids emerged on top. What are some of the things we as adults can do to help our little ones cope, to help, or even just recognizing that the little things that we need to catch on, that is affecting our kids' mental health. I remember when I started school, I had a little talk with I was doing a video on my son. Whenever I do my videos, my 7-year-old son, he is my cameraman. So he comes and he tells me, "Mom, shift to the left, shift to the right." Okay, perfect. Yeah. And then sometimes I'll be saying something, and he'll be like, "No, I'm not understanding that. That doesn't make sense." And once I called him, I said, "Come on camera and talk with me." And I was talking about starting school on what it would do to me. And I would have never asked him if he didn't have that conversation. And I asked him, I said, "How you feel about mommy going back to school?" And I thought he was going to say, "I'm excited," because that's how I felt, right? At the same time, I was a bit nervous. And he started telling me, how he felt, how he felt like I was not going to have enough time for him. And all of these different things, and I felt so bad. Like I literally broke down during the conversation, because it was something that I would not have normally had, a discussion I would not have normally had with him, if it wasn't for the fact that I was doing something with him and it just came up. What are some of the things that we can do as parents or as adults to help the younger ones where it relates to their mental health?
Well, some of the work that I'm doing right now with Pathways to Care, it focuses on children, youth, and their families, because we recognize that, you can give kids all of the, structures and all of the coping mechanisms and words and behaviors that are healthy for their mental wellness. But if they go home and everything is being undone, or they're being, given a completely different message by their parents or their families, it won't work, right? So, families are incredibly important. And I think that one thing that families can do is exactly what you did with your son. You ask your children how they feel. You engage and talk with them. from a non-judgmental and loving place, right? And you like work things through, right? Like what your son told you, I'm sure it didn't make you not go to school, but it allowed you to have an open conversation about how he's feeling. And I'm sure you reassured him that, you're still going to be there for him and things are going to change, but it doesn't mean that you don't love him anymore. And kids just want reassurance. So my mom, she has a 12-year-old son who's the most hilarious and fun person that is in my life, honestly. But the way that this guy talks about things like mental health, you know, having a break, getting alone time, needing time for himself, needing to cool out. The way, like, his language around mental health is so unbelievable. And, a lot of it is because my mom creates an environment where he can talk to her. So, if something bothers him during the day, my mom will always tell me, like, if I say something to him that's, off the cuff or, a little bit, rude, my mom will tell me the next day, your brother last night before he went to sleep, he told me that he was, offended by what you said. And so that then makes me go to him and, talk to him about what I offended him, with. And, it goes the other way, but of course he's 12, so it's a little bit more difficult on his behalf. But being able to talk openly about mental health with this guy, it's created like a different, a whole different point of view and understanding of it. Like, he uses words like mental health. So like he wouldn't say that person has, like, they're mad or they're crazy. I've literally heard him say, this person has mental health issues or mental health challenges. His language is unbelievable because it's being normalized in his world. And I even think about how me and my brothers grew up. Our dad worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and although he was in chaplaincy, he worked with clients there all the time who had schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety, the whole gambit. And so whenever we wanted like money or, bus tickets or whatever, he would say, okay, meet me at the office. And when we're like, 13, 14 at the time. So we're like, oh God, we have to go down there. And it used to be like on Queen Street West, which was like a really seedy area of Toronto on the West End. And like, that's the neighborhood, like we grew up a little bit north of there, but it used to be even seedier, like in the like 90s, right? Early 2000s. And like, but going there and seeing his patients and seeing the same faces over and over to the point where we knew people's names and we were able to interact with people, and it wasn't a big deal. That was really helpful in normalizing mental health and mental illness for me as a kid. Mm-hmm. And so not everybody has that opportunity, but I know that those interactions definitely impacted how and what I ended up studying and the ways that, the kinds of work that I do now. So, it's just really about, I guess the message really is that, if we open up talks about mental health in genuine, loving, safe ways, we're going to see transformation in our communities, and that's what we really need.
Yeah, I agree with you. A lot of people don't, especially Caribbean people. We grow up being scared to talk to our parents about so many different things. I didn't experience that with my mom. With my dad, he was a little bit more crass. Like, he'd be like, deal with it, like. That was there was a really cool balance with the two of them, because my mom allowed you to speak and you could speak your mind and you could be honest with her, but my dad kind of just told you, row your boat, he was that type of person, right? So I guess we got the best of both worlds. Yeah. So we were able to recognize when we have issues for the most part and stuff when we're dealing with stuff. But a lot of people grow up where they're terrified of their parents, and terrified not in the sense of I'm terrified of you, but terrified to speak to them about things that are concerning them, because you might be terrified of your parents because you do something bad in terms of discipline, but terrified in the sense I cannot speak to you if somebody touch me inappropriately. I'm scared because you might beat me. I'm terrified to talk to you about somebody, or I want to start having sex, and I don't know how to, or I just saw my period, or like simple things like that. I know of young girls who are scared to talk to their moms about period, and they never had an opportunity to do it, and they never, or she told me, this is things that you don't talk about. It's private stuff. You don't talk about, even within your household. You cannot talk to your mom because your mom's saying it's private stuff. It becomes so dismissive and stuff. And a lot of that weighs in on your on you as a human being, like growing up. That's a lot to have to deal with on your own, you know. And I feel like we need to start breaking certain chains, and these sort of chains, because a lot of and it was passed on from our ancestors. Our, you know,
Mm-hmm.
parents probably were raised by grandparents, or they were raised by very strict parents, and we just feel they just feel like they have to keep it up. But we need to break it, because I feel like I benefited a lot because I was able to communicate with my mom. And I think I was able to communicate with my mom, not necessarily because she was the most open person, but because of the line of work she was in and what she saw around her. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like she wanted to connect with us so that we would feel that she's a safe person to come to first, you know, before anything else. And that became a bond, you know, like it became an unbreakable bond, you know, that we trusted her with anything. We could say anything in front of her, including cursing, you know, like anything was okay to say in front of her, because she made it so comfortable. But a lot of kids grow up not having that, and it weighs on them, you know. And it's hard. It's a lot of, and then you have your parents telling you, you have to go to school and study and make sure you pass all your tests and whatever. I spend my last dollar to take you to school and feed you and whatever. Like, it's like, just put yourself in that child's place, you know, like, for
It's
instance.
pressure. Yeah, and I think that even in the Caribbean, like we don't have, well, when I was a kid, we didn't have standardized testing. Now there's a little bit more of that going on, but I mean, CXCs and like common entrance and things like that, those are serious exams that kids go through across the Caribbean. And, you know, they build excellence and they definitely, you know, give kids certain academic skills, but they're incredibly stressful. You know, like I can't imagine like 11-year-olds going and doing this huge exam that's going to determine where they go to school. And you know, the way you go to school also determines, you know, how successful you're going to be and who you're going to be your friends and what your jobs are going to be, etc. So that's a lot of pressure to put on an 11-year-old. When I was 11, I don't even know what I was doing, first of all. And if I was given a common entrance exam, I probably would have done very poorly because I don't perform well, you know, in those kinds in certain areas. Math is not my strong suit. You know, logic is very hard for me to even follow the question. But you know, I'm talented in other ways, and those standardized testings don't provide room for different kinds of intelligence or forms or expressions. So you know, all that to say, that's really stressful for children, right? So the least that, you know, you can't change the educational system yet, but what you can do is create an environment for your child to feel safe and feel vulnerable, to come to you with any kinds of stress or anxieties they're experiencing. And you know, as parents, I know that it's difficult to manage everything and to do everything right and to feel like you're doing everything right. But you know, I think people should just think about like what they needed when they were that age, and what I needed when I was 11 years old was just somebody to tell me that everything was going to be okay, and like, you know, I'm going to be fine. So I think that 11-year-olds probably still need the same reassurance.
Wow. You know what? It was really a pleasure having you here. I think a lot of people um, got a lot of information, you know, based on what we spoke about, and with your research that you're doing, and trying your best, of course, to incorporate the Caribbean as much as you can. I'm really appreciative of that as a fellow Caribbean woman myself, you know, and I'm so pro Caribbean. It's not even funny. I've been like talking about one Caribbean. Like, I wish one day before I die that the entire Caribbean would just be one big island.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Everybody would just be on the one system, and everybody would, you know, because I feel like together we are so much stronger.
Okay.
We have so much resources within ourselves, like within each island has its strengths, its resources and everything, and I feel like we can benefit so much more from each other. But I am really appreciative that you decided to incorporate the Caribbean in your research, and a research that of course will help as it relates to public health, as it relates to mental health in the Caribbean. And I hope that someday soon that even the organization that you work with, although it's focused in Ontario,
Mhm.
that will eventually trickle to the islands, because Um, I I don't know about other people, but before, you see mental health as the back burner kind of the, oh, that's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, mental health. Nah, I'll check that after. Doctor, just do my physical and leave me alone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to take it a little bit more seriously. There needs to be a little bit more emphasis placed on it, because like Nancy who just commented, she was saying that in the comments that she felt that if she and her partner had gone were more open, if her partner was more open at the time to therapy, they would have survived the
Mm-hmm.
relationship, because they went their separate ways, and and a lot of it has to do with how we feel about therapy as a
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean people. We feel that once you've gone to once you decide you want to go see a therapist, something is broken, quasi finish. Like that's how we look at it, right? And it's not about trying to grow and get to know each other better, and get to know yourself better, because I feel that that is the space that it's supposed to be. I hope
Mm-hmm.
that your information, or your research will eventually build or yield fruit in the
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean, and that we can have facilities, or people that we feel comfortable without feeling that there's a privacy concern, because that is definitely a concern where people are. I probably they should make them sign a some sort of document.
Yeah, NDA.
Because I just feel like people have always had that issue. I do not want to come and talk to so and so, because I don't feel like my business will be on the road, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And people definitely have that fear, and there are all other things that are associated with it. Even when I wanna reach out to people who have issue of mental health issues in their family. They come from families that they call everybody in their family crazy. I've heard that so many times, and people don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know how to change that, and it's so stigmatized. But I hope that someday things will change. Because as Black people, I feel like we have our mind is our well, in general, your mind is your most powerful thing.
Yep.
And to lose your mind is to lose
Yeah,
yourself.
exactly.
And I'm so grateful and thankful to you that you've taken on the Caribbean, and you've done a lot of conferences across the Caribbean. Like, see, Cindy's been on there, and she said, stay blessed, mental health is important. Thankful to Fatima as an outlet.
Anytime, Cindy.
Cindy's on there. She commented a few times and stuff. But people recognize it's important, and as you said,
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah,
a matter of the resources, and we
yeah,
getting those resources in the
yeah,
Caribbean to help our people,
yeah.
because
And normalizing the talk about it, right? Like as if we get the resources and we still haven't normalized the discussion, we're not going to use it, right? So we have work to do, and then we also have like these structural issues to push against. But things do have to change. Like I don't. I wouldn't do the work that I do if I didn't believe that change is possible.
thank you so very much for talking to me with us, and for all of you who came on. Dr. Fatima, do you have any final words?
I mean, everyone. I just hope that everyone leaves with the understanding and that they are entitled to good mental health, and that you can every day work towards something in your own personal life that is going to improve your mental health. I mean, I would love to stay in contact with people. I shared my social media information with you. I also have a web page on a website called academia.edu. All of my research is put up there. It doesn't matter about copyright, which I shouldn't be announcing on a live video feed. But I mean, any research that I've done in the Caribbean, in Canada, wherever, it's up there. So, if you want to stay in contact that way and use the resources there, I'm happy to have you and for you to use my works.
Thank you for the time. I want to commend you on your work. I want to congratulate you on your new job, um,
Thank you.
and and wish you all the best. And hopefully we can
Thank
stay in
you.
touch, because we didn't
Uh,
realize that we were in the same city as much as.
And we have the same style. I'm afraid if I see you in person, are we going to be wearing the same dress, same shoes? Like, what's going to go on?
Because you realize we have same color nails too. I was like, I'm watching you talk, and I was like, what?
Same nail color. Oh my gosh, this is getting eerie. Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun. No, I hope it's not planned at all, but I mean, it's a blessing. What? Thank you so much for having me, Jael. I had a really fun time.
Thank you very much for coming on, and I hopefully we can stay in touch and connect again. Thanks to all those of you who came on. Carvel is just coming on. Jarrell saying really enjoy this. Continue your amazing work. You know, people are sharing their feedback. I hope you guys share the video as well. Make sure you click on the link and share the video.